Andrew Collinell, thanks for joining me. The Prime Minister started by saying on the onset we would have to go 6 months before we could relax the bans. Then he said maybe 3 months or something, or a month. Now he's saying, well, 3 weeks' time we will review the bans. Why wait 3 weeks to review bans that might seem dated by the end of this week?
Well, you're right. He was very definite at the start, Andrew, that it had to be, once we shut things down, it was for 6 months. Now, I think there's evidence that we shut things down at the right time. I guess my position now is within the next week, I think we should be opening things up, or certain states should at least. I mean, we're not in the situation that Singapore, who's had the renewed outbreaks, are, in that we have 6 states and 2 territories. Why couldn't states who, like Western Australia, who've had 0 cases for a couple of days, or Northern Territory, who've had 0 cases for 2 weeks, at the very least start opening things up and see how that goes? And the National Cabinet process has been a credit to those involved in a lot of ways, but one of its limitations is they all seem to go together. And Scott Morrison wants them all united, but it's this that's going back or easing restrictions off somewhat, because Victoria, your home state, are very bolshy. In particular, they don't want schools back at all, and we know other states are doing different things with schools, staging them back or having them back. And Victoria, I think, would like the social restrictions to go for another couple of months, whereas other states are more prepared to move. So that's a complicated factor in it all. The state health officials too, they're pretty spooked, I think, about a second wave, but there are so few cases now. We know that there's, close to 600,000 applications for the dole that have occurred in the past 3 or 4 weeks. We know that there are many more unemployed who are going to go on the JobKeeper subsidy. I just think it's time to act fairly soon, and while it should be gradual and sensible, I don't see why it can't happen in the next week. I don't see why we should wait 3 weeks, Andrew.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think he should not let himself be tethered by whatever mad frolic that Dan Andrews is going on, the Premier of Victoria. Let every state do it themselves and let Victoria pay if they've gone too far, which I think they have. And as for the second wave, Singapore, that's such an anomaly. 3/4 of their so-called second wave infections have occurred in very tightly packed hostels of migrant workers. We don't have such hostels here. If we get a second wave, let's deal with the second wave. But let's not sit here thinking, oh, it's a Singapore situation. Now, I noted that the Chief Medical Officer now, who had been supporting 6 months, we'll wait for 6 months, is now talking about a fairly early return to community sports. It seems to be even pushing the government towards this. What's going on there?
Well, I don't have an answer, but it is quite confusing. Perhaps the states, or some states, have raised community sport. Perhaps Brendan Murphy has a particular interest in community sport, but he said he was asked to look at that in the parliamentary committee hearing today. Scott Morrison was then asked about this, and he said, well, I'm focused on schools and workplaces. And I think the first easing of the restrictions has definitely been put to me will be schools, sort of part-time staged, and then workplaces part-time stage. Basically a change in the messaging where we would go from work at home, if at all possible, to you can go to work a couple of days a week. And then they'll sort of calibrate it from there, see if there are any outbreaks, any problems, and move on from there. So Morrison's keen on the economic things. Brendan Murphy, I guess, was talking about a social thing there where bans could be lifted. And I do think those sorts of things are important too, in terms of our well-being, returning to normal. But community sport is something of a big step, because on Saturday mornings then you'd have a lot of parents out, a lot of kids out, not much social distancing when they're playing rugby or AFL or all the rugby league or all the rest. So it's kind of an interesting thing that he's thrown in the mix there.
Well, it is, and I would have thought that the most essential thing is actually go back to work to pay for this catastrophic cost of all these bans, rather than run around a sport field throwing a ball. I mean, valuable as that is. But at least I think the NRL, got a lot of criticism for some of the plans it had to try and keep playing sport for as long as possible. They may be creating a competition and somewhere locked away, I don't know, an island or some remote country town which locked away, just keep the sport going. But I just think they're on the ball, and good on the NRL. I just wish more business leaders would be talking too about a return to business as soon as possible. Like the NRL is saying, what, May 26?
Yeah, May 28, and why not? And the competition would be based in Sydney, based in one area, as I understand, to try and minimise players coming down with the virus, because, of course, if one player comes down, they pretty much have to shut it down until that's involved, contact tracing happens. So they're trying to avoid that. Having said that, I've been told it'll be fly in, fly out. I just think these sorts of things should be encouraged, and people shouldn't be so black and white in their prescriptions.
Look, I don't think people are buying this crisis talk much at the moment, and so the government should just level with people, be honest, and if there is a second wave, deal with the second wave when or if it comes. Andrew Clennell, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.